Fantastic. Time to get to, I guess, the bit that everyone's joined us for, which, as I opened with, we are fortunate enough to have both Hannah and Brian presenting to us. This is the second of these international or joint international events that we've had. And I find, the last one and definitely this one presents some very interesting perspectives from the UK and from Australia. So Hannah Loebl is our first presenter. Hannah's a senior manager of the wholesale market optimization software team at EDF Energy in the UK. She completed a theoretical physics PhD, which was very impressive, in 2004, and then joined the British Energy as a trading analyst. She's continued her work in wholesale energy markets for almost 20 years. Initially as a quantitative analyst and later as later in business planning. She now manages a team of software engineers producing tools used by EDF's 24/7 energy trading ship team, allowing them to optimize and dispatch nuclear, gas, and battery assets. So some very interesting perspectives there, and definitely good opportunities to learn for our Australian attendees. Brian Joseph, on the other hand, so Brian is our second presenter as the Australian representative. Brian has over 4 years of experience in modelling the major electricity markets of Australia, including the NEM in the eastern states of Australia and the WEM for Western Australia. Brian leads a range of market modelling exercises, including assessing transmission investment projects and future renewable and storage assets, system planning studies, assessing new market designs, and conducting detailed technical and cost-benefit analysis. He provides modelling advice to support various stakeholders in the market, including TNSPs, developers of renewable assets, operators and owners of existing generation assets, and the market operator and various government organisations. Brian holds a Bachelor of Engineering in Electrical Engineering from the University of Queensland and is one of our NGN members that's an active participant in Seagrey Australia's C5 mirror panel. We are very fortunate enough to have both of these presenters along, and with that, I'll hand over to Hannah. So Hannah, looking forward to the presentation. Thank you to the both of you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Cool. So yeah, thank you for inviting me to come and talk today. I'm going to be covering the changing electricity market from a UK perspective. So let me say, probably my views are going to be my own personal views, maybe not EDF's views. So don't assume this is the kind of corporate view. But yeah. So I'm going to go through I'll just introduce myself, then give you a bit of an overview of EDF. Talk about the wholesale markets optimization setup in EDF, the way the team is organised. And then go through how the electricity market has changed, how the kind of cost of imbalance has changed, what's going on at the moment in market prices in the UK, how we're using batteries now in the UK energy system, and then just some thoughts about the future. So yeah, as has already been said, so I'm Hannah Loebl. I live in the Forest of Dean, so I'm quite lucky. Although EDF is a London-based company, I get to live out in rural Gloucestershire and generally work from home. COVID was very helpful for some of us, and we now work from home permanently. Yeah, completed my physics PhD in 2004 and went straight into the energy industry, and I've been there ever since. I've always really worked in the kind of wholesale markets area, in that trading area. Although EDF is a very large company and does all sorts of different things, I've found that the trading area is the most interesting. It's always different. Every year we're doing different work, even though I've been in quite a similar role. And I've moved on now to managing our software engineering team. We've got a team of 6 software engineers, and we also have a data and technology graduate scheme as well. So the graduates rotate through my team, and we got one of those there at the moment. And as we've already said, we mainly look after the tools for our 24/7 shift trading team. But we also kind of manage the technology transition for WMO, training our analysts in using new Python and that sort of thing, and we're kind of taking over more and more of the tooling used across WMO. So a bit of an overview of EDF. We're, as I say, a very, very large company. We're a vertically integrated company. So we have both a generation business and we also have a supply business. So we own all the nuclear power stations in the UK. We also have coal and gas assets. We were expecting to shut our coal station down by this winter. But now, due to scarcity of power this winter, we've been requested to keep that power station running so that grid can turn it on if needed. We also have a lot of renewable energy, either from our EDF Renewables business supplied through to us, or where we buy it from our customers. And then also we have quite a large battery portfolio now as well that is part of kind of EDF's area that they manage. On the customer side, we supply to kind of all types of customers, really. On the power side, very large businesses and multiple sites, like big supermarkets, hospitals, that sort of thing, through down to domestic customers, over 5 million domestic customer accounts with power and gas. We're now just getting into the industrial gas supply side. EDF wants to help Britain achieve net zero. In order to do that, we need to get into the industrial gas market to help those large industrial customers decarbonise. Then sitting in the middle of all of this really is WMO. So all of the generation volume comes to us to hedge. We also need to hedge everything that the customer's business is selling. We design all the hedging strategies and we do all the trading. And then for the long-term trading, anything from beyond day ahead, all of that actually is done via EDF Trading, which is a separate company under the EDF group, and they do all the long-term trading directly onto the market for all of the different EDF subsidiaries kind of through the world. And so we just give them our orders and they're the ones who actually put those trades on the market. But for the short term, from the day ahead and then within day markets, we manage those ourselves in EDF through that 24/7 shift trading team. So a bit of a kind of overview of the way that WMO is set up. So we've got kind of five legs really in this area. So the first one, operational development and planning. So that's the area that I sit in, and we manage all of the change that is happening within WMO from either a business change perspective of different contracts or different procedures that we need to implement, through to all of the IT change needed to manage everything that we're doing in WMO. We support all of WMO's IT applications. A lot of the things that we use within our area are bespoke built. We don't use that many tools that you could just buy off the shelf. And so we design and build all of that stuff ourselves. In the next area, energy trading solutions. That's where we maintain our customer relationships. That's our kind of sales leg. And there we're developing kind of new opportunities, going out and talking to new battery asset owners. This is a huge growth area at the moment because there's batteries being built all over the country. Also new wind farms as well. And so designing new deals for these new types of assets. Also in this area, we have our cost stack team. In order to be able to price contracts correctly, you need to add in risk premia to the contract. So if you think about hedging somebody's demand, they're actually going to have very detailed shape in their use, which you're not going to be able to trade in the markets until you get down to the very short term. So you need to include some risk premia in there to manage the costs that you're going to have as you manage that shape. Also in the UK market, the non-energy costs, so the costs of balancing the system, using the transmission lines, using the distribution lines, none of that is passed through to domestic customers. You have to forecast what you think it's going to be and price that into the tariffs. So that's a very important role for this team, is to work out what they think those costs are going to be and put those into our kind of tariff prices that we're giving our customers. Then in the generation liaison area, that's where we interact with the power stations, so helping them plan when they should have their outages, given what market prices are doing, and doing their remit notifications. So that's where we have to tell the market what the availability of our power stations is before we trade. So if we have a trip, if a power station turns off, you first need to publish that information to the market before you're allowed to trade off the back of that information. Otherwise, that would be insider trading. Another important area in this team is the creation of price curves. So again, if we're to price our customers, it matters what the shape of their use is going to be. Energy prices are different every half hour through the day. And so we need to be able to create an accurate view of what we think prices are going to be in the future. So we have a kind of fundamental stacking model, which looks at projected demand and what power stations you'd need to run to meet that demand. And that gives you a shape of power prices through the day, which you can then scale with the closing prices each day to give you this view of what you think prices are going to be so that you can price contracts. Also, this team do work for the shift traders. So they work out what do we think market prices should be each day, given what power stations are available. And we have our view of where prices should outturn. So we can tell in the day ahead market, do things look overly expensive or overly cheap? What position might we want to take kind of at the day ahead versus the within day? Then we have portfolio operations. Another very important team here is our volume forecasting team. We need to be able to forecast the output from all of the wind farms that we manage and the solar sites that we manage, and also our demand from our customers, both all the way through from domestic through to industrial and commercial. And we have automated models that are running 4 times a day and updating our best view of forecast into our trading team so that we can adjust the position throughout the day. This team also decides on the hedging strategies. We have to manage in the UK market, we have the price cap at the moment on the tariff for domestic customers. We have to make sure that we're hedging that perfectly so that we don't incur costs. We also have the curve trading team here. So they're the team that are interacting with EDF trading and sending through our orders. And we also have the customer desk. So some of the very large customers that we have, they actually choose when to buy power themselves rather than us just giving them a price. So they'll ring us up and say that they want to buy, particular power on days, and then our traders will give them a price. And then the last section is the short-term trading team. So as I say, they're our 24/7 shift trading team. They trade the day ahead through to the within day. They work 12-hour shifts, 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening, 2 people on shift at a time. And they're, as I say, my main customers. So if you think about the kind of change of the GB generation mix, when I first started, it was very, very different. And so we had large amounts of kind of baseload nuclear power, price responsive dispatchable coal and gas units. So if you think about the shape of energy use through the day, you'd have your baseload running all the time. And then when demand increased through the day, you would then turn on your coal and gas units to match the shape of demand. It was all quite simple. We had all these spinning turbines that gave the system inertia that allowed us to manage the frequency of the system. Great Britain was pretty much an island. We had limited interconnection to Europe, and our gas market was pretty much a GB kind of gas market. We were using our own gas. Our generation was kind of close to the use, so it was a lot cheaper to balance the system. We didn't have to worry about kind of transmission constraints across the country. Now, if you look at this chart, I mean, you can see the capacity is increasing, but that doesn't mean that the actual generation is going to increase. It's all onshore, offshore wind and solar. So this isn't guaranteed generation. Often it's located offshore, maybe in the north of Scotland. It's located a long way from demand. So we've seen a lot of costs where there are transmission constraints between Scotland and the south of the country where there's more demand, and grid are actually having to pay the wind farms to turn off and pay gas stations down south to turn on, just to have the power in the right place. So it's a lot harder for grid to balance this new system, and we're much more reliant on batteries now to maintain the frequency of the system, because we don't have all these spinning turbines anymore. The wind farms don't give us frequency management. Also now you can see the interconnectors are increasing, and that gives us more connection to Europe, which means that if European prices are higher than UK prices, that means that the power will flow out of the UK, and that drives our prices up as well. And we also have now a lot of liquefied natural gas terminals all around the UK, so we get a lot of our gas in via ship, and that could come from anywhere in the world. So we're now connected to the kind of the global gas markets, and so all of these different things influence our prices in a way that they never did before. So just as an example on the kind of balancing costs, you can see it's significantly increased, partly around due to COVID, kind of managing the fact that there was too much generation because of all the wind, and demand was limited. But also we see, we forecast these costs to go up and up and up, partly due to energy costs in general rising. But as I say, also this new system of intermittent generation is just much more expensive and much more difficult to manage. So looking at power prices, these are pretty extreme. This is taken the other day. So if you look at the kind of the grey line, that's the day ahead prices last winter. You can see those very spiky periods. That was really exciting last winter when that started happening. I think around September was when the wind stopped blowing for quite a while, and there was very constrained system. And it was quite shocking to see these prices of, 400, 500 pound base load. And we even saw prices of 4,000 pounds in particular half hours that were particularly constrained. But all that was on the back of a winter price that was very low. And now if you look at what's happening with this dark blue line, the winter 22 price, it's phenomenal. We've never seen anything like this before. The whole winter is priced at around 400 pounds, 450 pounds at the moment. So then if you stack that volatility that we saw last winter on top of this 400 pounds, no one really knows what's going to happen there. Things might calm down. A lot of this has been driven by Ukraine war and limited kind of power in Europe. But yeah, this is mind-blowing really. And as I say, no one really knows what's going to happen this winter. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is the spark spread. So normally you would see the spark spreads are pretty flat. This is just the kind of profit margin of running a gas station, so producing electricity, burning gas. These should be quite flat numbers. And again, you can see, look what's happened just in the last few months. It's completely broken away from how it's ever behaved before. So this is a fear factor. This is a human factor. You can't model this with fundamental modeling. This has been driven by, again, worries about, is there going to be enough power in Europe this winter? And all the interconnectors to Europe are clearly going to be flowing outwards. Our prices look high at 450 pounds. In France, it's 1,500 euro for the peaks. And so yeah, a very, very challenging market, a very challenging winter that we're going into. So then just some thoughts really around storage. These are National Grid's storage scenarios of where it might go in the future. Obviously, we need storage when we've got intermittent generation, but the reality is of these charts, we're a long way from having kind of meaningful storage to help kind of manage the system. And then one of the things that batteries are doing, obviously, when we went into the battery market, we called our product Power Shift, which was about shifting demand from one part of the day to another. You charge your batteries up when prices are cheap, when there's excess power, and you discharge them when prices are expensive, because there's high demand. And what you're trying to do is kind of trying to balance the system through the day and make kind of demand flatter through the day. So that's what we expected to happen, was these batteries would be trading in the wholesale market and just moving demand around kind of to different times of the day. But because of all this intermittent generation, all this wind power, grid are not able to manage the system without batteries. And so none of the batteries at the moment are doing any of this wholesale trading. They're all providing these frequency services just to keep the frequency of the system in the right place. And so what we do now is that every day we're kind of trying to make the decision, where's the value for these batteries? Is the value in wholesale, or is the value in these frequency services? And that becomes the kind of the important factor in trading, is deciding which products to use with your batteries. And this will continue to change and evolve. Again, particularly going to be interesting through the winter to see the value of these different products. So what about the future? I mean, obviously decarbonisation is massively important. We need to get to net zero. Talking about the heat waves that just recently in the UK, this is unprecedented. We've had it, 2 degrees higher than we've seen before. So we need to, climate change is a thing, we need to sort this out. So we need to decarbonise domestic heating, we need to move to heat pumps, travel, we need to move to electric cars. But we haven't, there's not really enough power coming on into the system. We're behind with building the nuclear power stations, and all the renewables just bring intermittent generation. And also, we're not really far enough ahead. Putting heat pumps into houses, new builds still don't have them. So we're a long way behind where I personally think we need to be on decarbonisation. With hydrogen, the hydrogen economy is again slowly coming to life. So when we build Sizewell C power station, we'll have a hydrogen plant there, and they're looking a lot at green hydrogen, producing that from the wind farms. You can think of it as a kind of storage capability. When there's too much wind, ideally we produce a lot more hydrogen at those times, and then we need to get those large industrial gas users off natural gas and using hydrogen instead. As I say, there'll be more and more renewables, floating offshore wind. We are lucky in the UK. Obviously, we have a lot of coastline, so we've got huge amounts of untapped resources there. But really, there is this need for long-term storage, and there isn't really an answer at the moment, I would say. We've seen it before, we'll see it again. The wind sometimes doesn't blow for days at a time, and so there needs to be another solution, really, to plug that gap when that happens. So yeah, I think big challenges for the UK and for the world in general. We're behind, I think, where we need to be, but things are moving in the right direction. But yeah, sorry, I'm a bit glum on all this sort of thing. But yeah, that's it for me. Thank you for your time, and yeah, let me know if you've got any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Hannah. I appreciate it. Ash, did you want to take it away with the questions, mate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Hannah. That was much appreciated. We'll start off possibly with the easy one from Matt. Does the UK operate a capacity market for dispatchable generators?
What is it, sorry?
Does the UK operate a capacity market?
Oh, yes, sorry, I meant to mention that. Yes, we do have the capacity market, so that's a big element that's happening at the moment for us. So our nuclear power stations, coal and gas, all go into the capacity market. The capacity market didn't really work like it should have done. They ended up, people kind of, as always, somebody designs a market, somebody else finds a way of kind of finding loopholes and working around it. So lots of people started building very small diesel and gas generators, and so the capacity market didn't fund the creation of large gas units, which was kind of what the original plan was. But yes, there is a capacity market, but it's quite low value.
Yeah, excellent. So Angelique asks, what are some examples of long duration energy storage?
I thought there was one that was quite an interesting one recently I heard about, that's in Finland, of this big thing of sand. So a big silo of sand, you can heat it up and it'll stay hot for a long time, and then you can use that for domestic heating. So it wouldn't really work in Britain because we don't have this kind of district heating idea of multiple buildings all using the same hot water. But I think it would work well in Europe. There's also compressed air storage, so you could compress air, store it in gas, in depleted gas fields, and then get it back out again. There are lots of ideas, I think. There are lots of different things, but they're all kind of they're not there yet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure. Margie asks how flexibility, whether it's demand or supply, will help to deal with the current change of challenging electricity market.
Yeah, I mean, flexibility is really important. I mean, what you're trying to do is overall reduce the peak demand in the day, because you need enough capacity to cover the peak demand. And if you can move that, if you can move people's use, you're overall reducing that peak demand, and therefore you're reducing the amount of capacity that you need. So if you can get people to load shift, obviously, you know, people need to cook their dinner at night, you know, and things like that. But if more people had their own batteries, or yeah, or we just, you know, change the way industry works, or with like freezer management and all sorts of things. But really, it's just important to try and flatten out that use through the day, because overall that makes the whole system cheaper, because you need a lot less capacity.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on the back of that and ask a follow-up question that I was interested in? Do you see the most challenging in solving that being a demand side problem? So trying to change the way people operate and their behaviours, or do you see that being a supply side challenge also? Like which one do you see being harder to solve?
Yeah, it's hard because, like, obviously you can build new nuclear, but they're not flexible. You know, that all that does is gives you just generation through the day. You would get quite a lot of flexibility if everyone had electric cars, right? That's a huge amount of batteries that are going to be charging at night and then not being used, you know, not charging up during the day. You can't move people's behavior that easily. People are awake in the day and asleep at night, so there's a limit to what you can do there. And you can't change what the renewables are doing. They're just going to generate whenever there is wind or whenever there is sun. So I think it's about storage. I think that's the only way you can manage it, is you've got to put it all somewhere for a bit and then get it back out again when you need it.
Yeah. We've got one from and they ask, for energy storage, can you provide some opinions about the percentages of utility scale storage and domestic storage going into the future, for example, in 2035?
Sorry, I'm not an expert. I don't think I can't give you numbers.
All right, no worries. Yeah, I guess the answer would probably just depending on which market. It's probably maybe Brian has something up his sleeve as well. It's like back as well, but we'll hold that. There's one from Ian Rose, and they ask, are the batteries coordinated or are they responding to the local frequency based on droop settings?
So when they're doing this frequency response, grid basically has control over them. So grid is telling them when to charge and discharge. So they've got kind of control boxes on the batteries, and then grid is giving them the signals of what to do. So this product that you do, it means that you can be controlled by grid, so they're all coordinated centrally.
Sure. How are we going for time, Matt? I still have a few questions.
Yeah, we maybe go one more question, and then I guess just as a quick jump in, Hannah does have to head out of the event early, unfortunately, but we will have Hannah's details up at the end of the presentation, and if people have any questions, obviously with the sort of caveats of fair use and not spamming Hannah with 1,000,001 questions, I'm sure you'd be happy to receive a question or two.
Yeah, obviously I'm on LinkedIn if people want to, find my details as well.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll go with one more and then we'll let you take a breath, Hannah.
Thank you.
Probably end with another one, Angelique's. That's also, I have this question about what do you think are the main reasons that prices have been affected and become so high in UK, given that there's gas dependencies?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is it's fear. It's the fear of what is Russia going to do with the Ukraine war. So a lot of the gas coming into Europe comes from Russia, and a lot of those pipelines are off at the moment. So Europe isn't able to fill up the storage that it would normally do during the summer to get them through the winter. So the worry is that the gas is not going to flow from Russia this winter. That's really what's driving the fear. And that there'll be shortages of gas and power in Europe this winter, and so that's what I was saying about it's not you can't model this in a fundamentals way. It's become it's a kind of human factors thing. It's all risk really, and it all depends what happens over the next few months. Do these pipelines start flowing again, or does it stay as it is now? And prices will probably keep going up. But yeah, it's not a good picture, but it's down to Russia's behaviour, really.
Yep, just as a variable in the mix.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you so much. And well, of course, there'll be a couple of questions still left. And as you said,
Thank you.
if there's anyone out there who wants to reach her, she'll throw up her email as well at the end. So appreciate your time once again.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Hannah. Very interesting and really interesting, I guess, to see some of the similar outcomes to maybe what we're seeing in Australia, but not always for the same reasons, and how those different, as you say, different challenging environments and inputs are creating some similar disturbances. So I think with that, look forward to hopefully being able to stay with us for a bit longer. But when you do have to drop off, thank you very, very much for your time. Really do appreciate that. Brian, mate, we might look to hand over to you to give the Australian perspective. You're all good to unmute and share your screen.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. And thank you, Hannah, for that interesting presentation. So I'm just going to share the Australian national electricity market perspective. But before I start, I'd just like to mention that, opinions expressed are solely my own and don't express the views or opinions of my employer. So with that in mind, I'll just quick intro to myself. So I'm a senior manager in the energy market modelling team here in Brisbane, Australia. I'm in a team that provides forecasting and modelling services to various stakeholders in the market. We model the major markets in Australia, including the national electricity market, which is the largest market I'll be talking about today, as well as the wholesale electricity market in WA. We also model New Zealand and Singapore and other markets. So just a bit of an agenda. Going to go into, I guess, what the characteristics of the NEM is, the generation mix today, but also how it's going to look moving forward. So what's the penetration of renewables, storage, closure of coal, and I guess just transmission investment required to facilitate all of this, before going into some of the emerging challenges in Q&A. So what is the characteristics of the national electricity market? One thing I guess that makes it unique is it's this kind of long and skinny AC power system, which really spans the east coast of Australia, or the eastern seaboard in Tasmania. So it's really about 5,000 kilometres end to end, and it's about 1,000 kilometres roughly between the major generation centres. I guess with that in mind, conventional synchronous steam and gas generators are becoming fewer and more distant from each other, and that in itself creates a challenge. On top of that, the NEM is an energy-only market, so that's quite distinct to, I guess, UK, which has a capacity market on top. But we're an energy-only market, similar to, say, ERCOT in Texas. On top of that energy market, we have these frequency control ancillary service markets. So there's 8 of them. So for contingency, rates are lower. So that's, I guess, to arrest and contain the frequency following a contingency. So if a generator trips the largest contingency, which is normally Kogan in Queensland, if that trips, you want to make sure that you can contain your frequency within a frequency operating standard. So they have these markets to facilitate that, FCAS markets. There is actually talk on the FCAS markets of introducing a fast frequency response market. So they're going through the market design now, so an even faster 2-second response to really contain frequency, just start getting higher rock-off, rate of change of frequency, inertia falling out. With this energy-only market too, as part of the NEM design, post-2025 market design, there are talks at the moment of potentially adding capacity market, and there's still ongoing discussions about that. In terms of the NEM, it's not a full nodal market. There are 5 pricing nodes. So I guess a node for each of the states of the NEM, so Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, SA, and Tasmania. The mainland is one AC grid, and then Tasmania is another AC grid that's connected at the moment by a single undersea HVDC cable that links Tasmania into Victoria. The markets here are marginally priced for both energy and FCAS. They've recently moved to 5-minute settlement. And I guess for this energy market, the prices go from -1,000 to 15,500. And that kind of market price cap gets reviewed on a regular basis. And it's there to ensure that you meet the reliability criteria. So they set that market price cap high enough to incentivize generators to come in to meet a reliability standard. So I guess simplifying the NEM down from this diagram here to the 5 nodes, today it looks like this, again, connected with interconnectors, and Tasmania hooked up purely by a DC subsea cable. I guess to give that locational aspect in the NEM for, say, generators in Queensland, they have a thing called a marginal loss factor, and that's with respect to a reference node within each of these areas. And so this is a factor that the market operator gives every financial year for each generator. It's really a kind of signal for investment, really to incentivize generators to connect to really stronger parts of the grid closer to the loads, so you have less losses. So I go back to my diagram again. A lot of the demand in Queensland is down in southern Queensland, about 70%, but it's really nice and windy up in here, but not too much demand in this area. And so if you put a lot of wind generators where there's good wind resource up in far north Queensland, away from the demand, you would get a higher loss factor because your energy to get to the load has to go over more conductor. So they have marginal loss factors, and that's quite a big signal, and really can impact the bottom line for generators. So they want to know this factor. And so my team, we actually go and forecast this out. We get market forecast, take it out 20, 30 years, and then we actually run it through AC power flows to calculate losses over the network and come up with these forecast at these loss factors. On top of that, it's a security constrained economic dispatch engine. So whilst it's also taking in all the bits from generators and scheduling them every 5 minutes, it's also subject to thermal, transient, voltage limits that are imposed in dispatch. And the grids, like many grids across the world, are designed for N-1, so you can take out a single line, have a single credible contingency, and still be operating in a secure state. So that's just a nutshell of the NEM and how it's designed. But just jump into the generation mix today. So the stats are, however, from 2020. So as you can see here, we have quite a lot of black and brown coal, almost 22 gigawatts of coal capacity. And that makes up about 66% of the generation in 2020. We also had 32 gigawatts of renewable capacity, so wind, solar, rooftop, and hydro. And that made up about 26% of the generation in 2020. A lot of that hydro is in Tasmania, so Tasmania is almost completely relies on hydro. And then we also have that snowy mountain skiing in New South Wales and also Victoria, a bit of hydro in Queensland. But that was just a snapshot of today, I guess 2020. But leading up to this, you can just see how much, even in the last, since 2017, the proportion of renewable generation has been going. So from 2017, wind, solar, and rooftop PV was just below 10% of that generation mix. And then going forward to 2020, it's coming up to 20%. So you can just see how much the generation mix is changing today. So how does it look going forward, at 2050? So the energy market operator, AEMO over here, every 2 years comes up with an integrated system plan, looking at the development of the NEM across various pathways and looking at the generation, storage, transmission investment to go along these kind of optimal development paths. I'm just focusing here on the step change scenario, which AEMO gives a 50% weighting. And it's really a scenario that's characterized by fast moving to meet Australia's net zero policy. And so we're looking at really having a fast paced transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy on the step change path. So as you can see, I was talking about us sitting in 2020 around this 30% mark of total generation from renewable sources. But even as you go towards, 2025 and 2030, you can see just how quickly that is changing. And so, even by 2030, we're getting to around 83% of that generation on the step change world coming from renewable generation sources. Even as early as 2025, there are a small number of dispatch intervals starting to emerge where 100% of the grid demand is being met by renewables, so wind, solar, rooftop, hydro. And so just, that rapid pace of growth here. Of course, though, on top of this, you're going to need firming or storage, and really just because of the variability in the system when you move through wind and solar. So in Queensland, we've been having quite a few cloudy days, or if it's less windy, you just really need to be able to ride through those long periods of renewable droughts and to firm them up. And so you can just see, again, under this step change scenario, kind of projected uptake of storage in the NEM. One project that's been committed that's quite big is the Snowy 2.0 hydro scheme. So that's 2 gigawatts of pumped hydro capacity, providing just over a week of storage at full clip. So quite a big project, and that's coming in at the moment around kind of late 2020s. But even beyond that, you can kind of see this huge uptake of storage in the NEM. And so I have deep storage, which is greater than 8 hours, medium storage 8 hours, and then your kind of shorter duration batteries. But in the step change world, AEMO really forecasts a huge uptake of coordinated DER storage. So this may be batteries that people install at their home, Tesla Powerwalls, but a retailer may take over it and have aggregated control and play in the market for energy arbitrage, FCAS, and then distributed storage, which is again things at a household level, but the end users optimizing it around their own energy needs. But yeah, you can just see that huge requirement for pumped hydro and I guess battery storage. I guess in terms of the NEM, we are quite fortunate to have really good terrain for pumped hydro. So there's quite a number of sites where you do get that difference, where you can get that difference in head height to make pumped hydro viable. So beyond Snowy 2.0 across various parts of the NEM, there are other projects that are getting serious granting and backing from government, such as even in Queensland, the Baroomba pumped hydro project. So I guess just in terms of that huge penetration of renewables coming in, I guess one thing that's important to note is, we don't have at the moment or projected for the future an explicit carbon price. We did have one quite early back in 2012 through to 2014, but it was unfortunately quite short-lived. But for its time, it was around $23 Australian per unit for a carbon credit. But yeah, that fell through. But if you are interested to know more about carbon pricing, there is actually a working group that's looking at carbon pricing in wholesale electricity markets across the world, and Australia is one of the studies there, so you can see how it looked back then and what the rest of the world is doing. But despite not having a carbon price, we do actually have various state-based energy targets through to 2030, and historically and currently we have a national renewable energy target scheme, and that really brought in a lot of the renewables that we saw through to today in 2020. And so this really incentivized, I guess, renewables to come in, because retailers had to buy these certificates from these renewable power stations as part of the scheme, and it required 33,000 gigawatt hours from these renewables for a 2020 target. But I guess looking forward, what's driving, perhaps some of this huge investment that's being projected is the various state targets. So a lot of them have a 50% target, such as Victoria and New South Wales by 2030, so 50% renewable generation. But then you look at, say, New South Wales, and they're, putting in 11 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2030. And a further 2 gigawatts of long duration storage. And Tasmania itself, whilst they are mostly supplied by hydro today, are looking at having even more renewables and putting in something like Marinus Link, another cable between Tasmania and Victoria to export that. So these are some of the renewable energy targets in the NEM that's driving it. But what's also happening is just the faster closure of coal. So as you saw in my earlier charts, a lot of the NEM is just being today comes from coal, but it is starting to close down faster. We have an aging fleet, and there's just challenging market conditions to keep these open, and there's the need to decarbonize. And so you can see here this dashed line is, I guess, the owners of these assets they have to put forward an announced retirement date. But this is starting to come earlier and earlier. So even just recently, Eraring, which is almost a 3 gigawatt power station in New South Wales, actually announced that they're going to close 7 years earlier than they initially announced, bringing it forward to 2025. So we're starting to see, closures faster than this announcements. But on top of that, the fleet is aging, and we're starting to get more frequent and longer unplanned outages. So this chart to the right just shows really, just going out to 2020, that there is an increase happening, I guess, in that forced outage rate for the coal fleet, given that they're getting older. The median age of the coal fleet across the NEM is about 35 years, so it is starting to get quite old. And even just last year in Queensland, there was actually a plant commissioned in 2001, Callide C in Queensland, actually had an incident where it basically exploded. And so that's a 400 megawatt unit on outage for a few years until it comes back on. So it's just, coal's having to close faster just because it's aging and costs are starting to become higher to operate and maintain it. But also just the market conditions where we have all these state-based targets forcing in renewables. And, you think about the term that Californian duck curve, with all the solar coming in, you're really starting to see prices come down in the middle of the day. And so it's starting to make more challenging conditions to keep coal running, given, they usually have a minimum stable level, and they can't, unlike gas, turn on and off. They are having to run through, these periods of low market pricing in the middle of the day, because unfortunately it's just not viable for them to go to 2 shifting. So yeah, this is forecast closure of coal at a very fast rate, and AEMO is forecasting in a step change world that all the coal is gone by 2040. And part of this also overlaid is AEMO actually puts in an emissions constraint saying, I guess, to keep levels below 2 degrees from pre-industrial levels, the raise in global temperature, they are overlaying this carbon constraint whilst there is no explicit price on carbon. But I guess it's also, with all this generation coming in and moving away from to places where there may be really good wind or solar resource, which is not necessarily where the coal power stations were before, there really is just a need for transmission investment. So again, this is kind of a projection at showing what's committed, anticipated, actionable, and future projects. So I guess one thing that AEMO is looking at is, and projects that are currently being studied for the regulatory investment test, is increased interconnection between regions. So looking at another cable between Tasmania and Victoria, looking at connecting South Australia in through New South Wales, and just increasing the overall interconnection between the NEM regions. And I guess given the geography of the system, you know, this real, it allows for sharing resource diversity. So it could be really sunny in Queensland and it could be a cloudy day in New South Wales, but the fact you have this interconnection really allows for that resource sharing. But I guess there is also investment needed out to renewable energy zones. So, you know, you look at New South Wales over here, and there's a whole bunch of renewables coming in parts of the network that may be weak. And so there is just that need to get that transmission to where the demand is. So there's just a lot of transmission investment, I guess, needed. And the current federal government at the moment has a $20 billion investment to rewire the nation, which will help go part way to seeing this plan. So I thought just some recent challenges in the market. So one that's come up earlier this year is, I guess, the high prices in the market suspension. So down here, you can see the monthly time-weighted spot price for each of the mainland NEM regions. So I just haven't included Tasmania here. And you can really see in the last few months that the spot prices are going up. And this actually led in June to a market suspension where AEMO suspended the market and took over control to keep it in a secure operating state. But I guess leading to this market suspension, one of the market features was accumulated price threshold. And that was actually hit. So that's done over a rolling window. And that meant administered pricing had kicked in at $300 a megawatt hour. And I guess what happened here is, given the high gas prices, Australia exports gas. The gas market is internationally exposed. They export LNG out of Queensland. Some generators were pulling out of the market because of this administered pricing, and so AEMO had to suspend the market and take control over and direct generators. But I guess leading up to this high period, it was really a combination of a few things. So during this period, there's quite a lot of rainfall, it was quite cloudy, so there's low solar output and also low winds. But on top of that, touching on this aging coal fleet and reliability issues, as I mentioned in Queensland, Callide C1 of the units had been on outage because it exploded last year. But there's actually around 3,000 megawatts of generation out of action through unplanned events. And it was also quite cold, quite earlier in Australia on the East Coast. So there was an early and severe onset of winter. So just increasing demand for both electricity and gas. So this is one of the more recent challenges, but I guess thinking about other challenges in this transition, one issue we're starting to see in the NEM, in particular in South Australia, is minimum demand getting lower and lower in the middle of the day. And that's actually creating operational challenges because it's getting to such a low level that it's actually challenging to keep certain synchronous plant online. It also just puts the system in, can put it in an unsecure state. So at the moment, South Australia is actually looking at measures to turn off rooftop PV during certain conditions, I guess, to almost increase that minimum demand in the middle of the day to help with operability. But another issue, and again quite unique to the NEM, is that it's a very long and skinny AC network. And these synchronous generators are starting to come out of the market, so a lot of coal and are coming fewer and more further apart. And so that creates challenges for, I guess, frequency control. You get declining inertia, which means you can have higher rate of change of frequency. And also, just by the nature of this long, skinny AC network, the way frequency can respond in the system, a trip in Queensland, that frequency dips in Queensland, there'll be a lag to the time it's seen in South Australia. So, you know, people often think about frequency as homogeneous, but there is this time delays. My colleagues, I've co-authored actually a paper on this, my colleagues at EY, and if you're interested to know more about this, at Paris, there'll be a poster and a paper coming out talking more about this issue. But one of the other problems coming up is with system strength. So even South Australia, again, is a very good poster child for all of this because it had a very high penetration of renewables. They closed down all their coal and they only really have gas now. But a few years ago, they actually had to put a cap on the generation of renewables for system strength purposes and actually direct on gas generators to run to provide, I guess, fault current and inertia. They've now been able to get around this issue by putting in synchronous condensers with flywheels to provide inertia in addition to fault current. But I'm sure we'll start to see more of these issues appear in other regions as a lot of this coal comes out that used to provide inertia and system strength. But I guess the other challenge is you look at the projection and just the amount of capacity of wind and solar coming in and the transmission required to meet these targets over the next 10 years and beyond. And it starts to, I guess, just how we deliver on this in the workforce. You think about Snowy 2.0, that actually just recently got announced to be delayed from 2026 out to 2028. So that's that 2D pumped hydro. And then you start to think about, okay, if there's a delay in these projects or delay in getting the transmission out, what's the impact to generators already connected and the challenges there? Or will that delay the closure of some coal because you don't have some transmission infrastructure up? The other challenge is actually to these generators connecting into the market. So if you don't have the transmission in there, you may be behind transmission constraints, you may have thermal limits. The marginal loss factors. So if you don't have enough network or you're not putting your generators in the right spot, these generators could be getting penalized through this loss factor. And there's just challenges again in the connection process at the moment. It's just the TNS teams being able to keep up with all the inquiries and go through the process. And as I mentioned before, just that decrease in reliability of the coal fleet and more weather dependent generation coming into the market. So I'll just pause there now and go to the Q&A.
Thanks, Brian. That was really insightful. And obviously the big list of emerging issues that we need to solve in the NEM in the next few years. Actually, our first question was pretty much related to that. From that list of challenges, what do you think is probably one of the most prevalent or one that stands out to you personally as the key one to solve going forward?
Yeah, I think they all kind of play hand in hand. So if you don't get the transmission up fast enough, you're going to start having some of those other issues with system strength or I guess just curtailment to those individual generators. So I guess the timing of how you coordinate all this investment, that's certainly a challenge I see in particular. But even, I guess, some of those shorter term issues where, like South Australia that had that cap on the amount of renewable generators they had, and I guess making those prudent investments earlier. So what they did with the synchronous condensers, I guess how you plan that into it, help with those challenges.
Yeah. Yep. All right. And do you see any long-term potential for nuclear generation here in Australia?
I think one aspect is obviously the the appetite and the social license. So at the moment, we're seeing even getting up some of these transmission projects, there's a great difficulty. You know, people think Australia is a lot of space and land, but some of that can be prime farming land. And if you're running transmission lines through there or putting up wind turbines, there is that social license and community stakeholder. So on that one leg, I can see even the challenges of seeing with wind, solar, and transmission, getting nuclear up, that social license would be quite tricky. But also thinking about the market conditions for it. And as I understand, nuclear is not as flexible. So it really is that base load. We're already starting to see that problem with coal, them managing to stay on in the middle of the day when your demand is getting really low. So from a market perspective, I do see it to be quite difficult to get some sort of nuclear, in which is base load generation, given you probably want more flexible plan to respond around demand. So I do see it also tricky from that market perspective, personally.
Yeah. I mean, transmission lines going to farms and not normally dealing with a lot of local councils as well, so that's also hindering in their installations. Another one from Matt, actually. Do you have any thoughts on capacity markets and their value, especially in light of Hannah's comments earlier about people gaming these markets?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one, and it's an ongoing debate, and I guess that's what the Energy Security Board and that post-2025 market design right now is actually trying to answer that question about what are the merits of the capacity market. But I guess one of the criticisms I've seen or heard of is that, you know, if you're giving capacity credits to coal, are you almost through this market keeping on certain generation longer that aren't surviving in an energy-only market? So that's one of the challenges there, I guess, from my perspective of that capacity market and how it's going to play into the incumbent generators and whether it actually has something perverse or at least allows coal to stay online longer. But on the flip side, is that capacity market incentivizing things like long duration storage that may not be able to fully stack up in an energy-only market, potentially, but I guess that's what we'll be keeping our eyes peeled over the next year while the Energy Security Board and the Australian Energy Market Commission works through that question about the merits of the capacity market.
Yeah. Actually, I had one. I'll probably sneak in. I saw that the AMC has passed a rule about putting mechanism for system strength to price that in. And do you have any thoughts on how you'd go about pricing that?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I'm not fully across at the moment where the AMC is with that design, but I guess explicitly creating a market for system strength, in my view, is in the right direction, because previously it was, you know, kind of given, it was almost a byproduct of just the synchronous coal plants. They kind of provided these services for free to the grid. And so I guess putting an explicit market to value it moving forward, it may help. And it may actually take away some of this from renewables that may actually have to pay for the system strength remediation as part of their connection arrangement. And so having some sort of central market around this could also lead to more efficient outcomes where, as opposed to every wind and solar farm connecting, having to put in their own system strength remediation measures, you can do a more centralized approach and have a market around that and value it. So sounds like a good idea, but exactly how you price it and how it's playing out in the design, I'm not fully across the latest where the ANC is on it at the moment.
Yeah, fair enough. And a question from Hasita, and he said, with more VPP programs being introduced, how will higher levels of contribution from households affect the market prices in the NEM?
Yeah, so if we do look at the level of the VPP forecast in AEMO to 2050, it's in the gigawatts. So you're talking about stringing together potentially all these 2-hour batteries and someone having control of retailer over it. And so if you can truly work at that scale in a fully coordinated manner, these aggregators doing these VPP programs, I think it can have significant impact in, you know, that diurnal profile. So if they're coordinated in a central way, they operate at a grid level and able to absorb cheap solar in the middle of the day and shift to the evening and lower that peak. So I think as an aggregator, these programs do eventuate. I think it will help suppress the energy prices, but they could also play into, I guess, FCAS markets potentially. So not only in energy, but provide frequency keeping services if coordinated by a single entity or these small batteries.
Yeah. I had a question, another one about the regional nodes you talked about, the RRNs. Is that the norm about how, I guess, MLFs or spot prices, etc., are calculated? Is that the norm, or is that specific to Australia?
So in our market design, it's just a reference point within this big node that way, for example, represent Queensland, a large geographical area. And so your marginal loss factors are with respect to that reference point, which is typically is the load centers. So it's usually around the capital cities. And so, yeah, your marginal loss factors are with respect to that. And then your interconnectors are trading between these reference nodes. And that concept is also used for how the constraint equations in dispatch are formulated. It's almost as if the generators are trading to that reference node, and then the reference nodes are trading with each other through an interconnector. That's how it is designed in the NEM because we don't have a fully nodal market. But if you had a fully nodal market, where every transmission or bulk supply point is a node, then you would inherently be capturing the losses directly through that and getting different prices between nodes based on congestion and losses. But it's, yeah, a NEM market design.
It's very sophisticated. Obviously, that works very well to capture the actual losses that are going into the system, makes it a fair system for everyone. So there's a question for Brian and Hannah, but obviously Hannah had to jump off the call, unfortunately. But Brian, I guess, what do you think as the key game changers apart from storage, which facilitate better energy markets for low carbon resources?
I guess they talk about this two-sided market from my perspective, and so you know, traditionally your generation follows your load, but potentially your load following your generation. So I guess incentivizing markets in a way so that people will almost respond during these high prices and not isolated from the wholesale market. So demand side programs and I guess being able to control your load around, you know, the variable renewables. In a nutshell, I think that two-sided market would be a big game changer.
Yeah, perfect. All right, we got our last one coming in from Peter Kilby, and he's asking, do you have any thoughts on the implications or the opportunities or challenges of EV uptake and grid integration?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and I think it also really depends on the jurisdiction. I was recently attending another webinar to hear about Norway as another example, and they have a very high uptake of EVs, but I've heard they have a gold-plated network, and so it's quite easy to just put in fast chargers everywhere and not worry about network issues as much. Whereas I guess in Australia, again, it's a very long and skinny AC network, and if you start putting in fast charge area, what's that network investment needed? The other challenge too, which is from my perspective around that grid integration, is they talk about vehicle to grid and vehicle to home, and potentially using a car battery, you know, to plug it into the grid and let a retailer, aggregator, or someone do something with that battery and play with it in the market. That could be a potential opportunity, but certainly from AMO projections and from what I've been seeing, it seems like that's a while to come, that vehicle to grid concept. But yeah, it's a very tricky one in Australia, I think, and it really depends on the jurisdictions and just the nature of our network. We're not as fortunate as Norway in that regard.
Yeah, that's a great question for any planning engineer out there on how best to plan the network EV uptake, because that is definitely coming. All right, thank you so much, Brian. That was definitely, we got through all of your questions, so that was definitely much appreciated. Staying late into the day for you and helping us get an insight into the market mechanisms in Australia and how they compare against those in the UK earlier. Matt, did you have anything else?
Sorry, mate. No, very, very good presentation, Brian. Really interesting to see. I'm just hopefully putting those details up. Have they come through? Yep. Fantastic. Right. Okay. Thank you very, very much, Brian, for your time. Also, thank you, a big thank you to Hannah, who has jumped on this call and managed to fit it in before a meeting of her own at the start of the day. Again, I'll just throw a quick plug out for if you're attending on the call, you're interested in getting involved in Seagrey, either within Australia or the UK, contact details are there. Would really encourage, it is a volunteer organisation that's member driven, and as is quite rightly pointed out, is free to young members to be a part of. So definitely drop us a line. Keen to hear from you, and also obviously with Brian and Hannah's details there. Jesus, I'll throw it over to you for any last closing comment.
I would just give a big thanks to Brian and Hannah for this fantastic presentation, and you guys for co-host this webinar. Yeah, just say that our next event will be a visit to the HV Lab in Manchester University. If you are interested, please get in contact with us. We're happy to help you with this. So get involved.
Thank you very much. Yeah, big thanks to our UK counterparts who Jesus and Angeliki, who are a big part of organising this event. This is the second one of these that we've had, as I said, and I think, look, given the successes we've had with them, looking forward to running many more throughout 2022 and 2023. So, look, guys, we will leave it there. Thank you very much. Look, best wishes to everyone in the UK with the heat and the challenges that are happening over there and Europe more broadly. And I hope everyone has a good day or a good evening.